Pursuant to House Resolution 491, the report is considered read. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by the direction of the Committee on Oversight and Reform, I call up H.Res. 497 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 497, resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find William P. Barr, Attorney General of the United States, and Wilbur L. Ross, Jr., Secretary of Commerce, in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with subpoenas duly issued by the Committee on Oversight and Reform.
Pursuant to House Resolution 491, the resolution is considered read and shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Oversight and Reform. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, and the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Comer, each will control 30 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend remarks and to insert extraneous material.
That objection is so ordered.
Madam Chairman, I yield myself 5 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I support this bipartisan resolution to hold Attorney General William Barr and Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross in contempt of Congress because it is necessary to preserve the integrity of this body and of the census. The Constitution mandates that we conduct a census every 10 years and that the census count every person. A full, fair, and accurate account is critical to ensuring that we properly allocate federal funding and congressional apportionment. I do not take this decision lightly. Holding any secretary in criminal contempt of Congress is a serious and sober matter, one that I have done everything in my power to avoid. But in the case of the Attorney General and the Secretary Ross, they have blatantly obstructed our ability to do congressional oversight into the real reason Secretary Ross was trying for the first time in 70 years, to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census. Secretary Ross testified under oath that he added a citizenship question, and I quote, solely. I want to concentrate on that word, solely, to help the Justice Department enforce the Voting Rights Act. But we now know that claim was nothing but a pretext. And do not take my word for that, Madam Speaker. The Supreme Court said that. Our committee's investigation uncovered evidence that Secretary Ross launched a secret campaign to add the citizenship question within days of assuming his post. We learned that Secretary Ross ignored warnings from experts inside and outside the Census Bureau, including the Bureau's chief scientists, that adding a citizenship question would be costly and harm the accuracy of the census. In other words, they were saying, if you do this, you're not going to have an accurate census. Our investigation also revealed that Secretary Ross spoke with Attorney General Sessions, Steve Bannon, and Chris Kobach. Contrary to his testimony to the Congress, the Commerce Department conjured up the voting rights rationale to hide these interactions. This entire Congress should be insulted by this. Committee Democrats first asked for documents from the Department of Commerce and the Department of Justice when we were in the minority in April and May of 2018. Both departments ignored us. When I became chairman, I renewed these requests on behalf of the committee. Since then, the administration has engaged in a purposeful efforts to obstruct, and I do not use that word lightly, our investigation. The departments have refused to provide key unredacted documents that we need to understand the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, about why they really made this decision. Instead, what did they do? They produced thousands of pages that were largely non-responsive, heavily redacted, or publicly already available. When they let us interview witnesses, what did they do? They ordered the witnesses not to answer more than 500 of our questions. Secretary Ross even refused my request to meet to try and work this out. Like I said, I do not come to this floor lightly. This is not an easy decision. But there comes a time when the Congress must speak up for the Congress. I grant myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
As a result, on April 2nd, more than 3 months ago, after a bipartisan vote, the committee subpoenaed these key documents, including a secret memo that the Department of Commerce wrote about the citizenship question and gave to the Department of Justice. The departments have admitted to us that this memo does exist, but they refuse to produce this document and many others. Now, I must say, in all credit, give credit where credit is due. My good friend and colleague on the other side, Mr. Meadows, worked tirelessly to try to help us get the things that we needed, and I appreciate that, trying to work in a bipartisan way. But going on from there, last month, in light of this obstruction, the Oversight Committee passed a resolution to hold Attorney General Barr and Secretary Ross in contempt of Congress. The vote was also bipartisan. However, many of our Republican colleagues apparently support the President's administration's refusal to comply with duly authorized congressional subpoenas. And let me say to my colleagues that what we are about, we need to be clear that we as a body have a constitutional duty to be a check on the executive branch. That's our job. Every 2 years, we swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. That is what we're supposed to do. And so my colleagues claim that we were interfering with the Supreme Court's decision on this issue. That argument never did make any sense to me. Since we launched our investigation in 2018, more than 10 months before the Supreme Court took up the case. But even if you accept that misguided argument, the Supreme Court case is now over. That argument is gone. The President announced last week that he would no longer pursue adding a citizenship question to the census. However, in that same speech, the President admitted that he wanted citizenship data to implement partisan gerrymandering. The President's statements directly contradict Secretary Ross's sworn testimony that the only reason, the sole reason, the Trump administration wanted this data was to help the Justice Department enforce the Voting Rights Act. The Departments of Justice and Commerce have been engaged in a campaign to subvert our laws and the process Congress put in place to maintain the integrity of the census. And I would say to all of our members, let's be very careful on what we do with regard to the census. It has a tremendous impact for 10 years on how federal funds, more than $660 billion, is appropriated over and over again. Apportionment, redistricting, and making sure that every American gets their fair share back of their taxpayers' dollars. The hard-working money, people who raise the money for our taxes. The resolution before us today is about protecting our democracy. It is about protecting the integrity of this body. It's bigger than the census. It's about protecting the integrity of the Congress of the United States of America. We need to understand how and why the Trump administration tried to add a question based on pretext so that we can consider reforms to ensure that this never happen again. There are those who will ask the question, why would the Supreme Court, having decided what they've decided, and why do you want the documents? We want the documents because we want to make sure that we do not in the future spend a year and a half chasing something that is not accurate. In the words of the Supreme Court, a pretext, delaying our process of getting an accurate account, which is exactly what the Constitution says we must do. And so I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support our resolution to hold Attorney General Barr and Secretary Ross in contempt of the Congress of the United States of America. And with that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I rise to claim time in opposition and yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, we are here today debating a premature and ill-advised resolution to hold Attorney General William Barr and Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross in contempt of Congress. In the eyes of the Democrat majority, their crime is not cooperating enough with the Democrats' investigation into the reinstatement of the citizenship question on the 2020 census. First, this contempt citation is a misuse of one of the most powerful tools available to this body. Second, the idea that the Trump administration is stonewalling this investigation, or even in Chairman Cummings' words, engaged in a cover-up from the top, is simply wrong. The bottom line is the Department of Justice and the Department of Commerce are cooperating with the committee's investigation into the reinstitution of the citizenship question on the 2020 census. The administration has produced a total of 31,000 pages of documents to the committee, 14,000 pages from the Commerce Department, and 17,000 pages from the Justice Department. The committee had heard testimony from 6 witnesses, with more interviews expected this month. Secretary Ross himself testified for over 6 hours about his decision to reinstate the citizenship question on the census. What the real issue we should be debating is why the Democrats are afraid to ask how many citizens are in the United States of America. Let's remember, just 1 month ago, the Supreme Court ruled that asking a citizenship question on the census is constitutional. Since the Supreme Court ruling, the President has said a citizenship question will not appear on the 2020 census. To put away all doubt about asking a citizenship question on the census and all future censuses, I introduced a bill last night to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census. My bill is intended to put away all doubt about asking a citizenship question on this and future censuses. If the Democrats can't impeach President Trump, they will instead hold his cabinet in contempt of Congress. This is just another episode in political theater. This exercise is not a responsible use of the contempt authority. This is just another attempt for the Democrats to delegitimize the efforts to accurately count the number of United States citizens in the United States, something that should not be controversial. This is all part of the same game plan to manufacture controversy around anything associated with the Trump administration. These are the sort of abusive tactics that we should reject. These are the sort of tactics that give Congress a bad reputation. We should be better than this.
You took my words.
I urge all members of the House to vote against moving this partisan contempt legislation. And I reserve.
Before I
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from
yield
Maryland.
myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Let me be very clear. This is not theater. I wish it was theater. It's not theater. This is about us making sure that we protect the integrity of the census and of this Congress. And with that, I want to yield now, Madam Speaker, to the distinguished lady from Michigan, Ms. Lawrence. 2 minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in strong support of this resolution to hold Attorney General Barr and Commerce Secretary Ross in contempt of Congress. Madam Speaker, we have reached a point that we as Congress must have the courage and we have the duty of our constituents of these United States of America to hold up the Constitution. Congress has an obligation to conduct oversight of the executive branch. Yet this administration complains each time we request information critical to fulfilling our investigative responsibilities. Today, the full House will vote to hold Attorney Barr and Secretary Ross in contempt, criminal contempt of Congress for their complete disregard of the Constitution. Not Democrats, the Constitution, and the refusal to provide our committee with relevant documents relative to the investigation of our 2020 census is 100% within our congressional responsibility to ensure the federal government is ultimately working in the best interests of people. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution, to stand up and fulfill their duty and responsibility to the Constitution, which says we must take care of the people of this great country, and that Congress will remain its power as a separate but equal branch of government. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for your leadership, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Keller.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the gentleman from Kentucky. Madam Chair, every member of Congress was elected to work on issues that will positively impact their districts. And as we stand here today, our nation is dealing with a crisis at our southern border, our seniors are struggling with rising prescription drug prices, our farmers are waiting for a free and fair trade deal with Mexico and Canada, and our veterans deserve care they have earned. Yet today, House Democrats are once again putting off these important issues and continuing with their partisan investigations of President Trump and his administration. Madam Chair, this administration has produced 31,000 pages of documents related to the census. This administration has made 5 senior officials available for interviews. All this due to a disagreement over a citizenship question on the census. Madam Chair, a citizenship question is not new, nor should it be controversial. Every census conducted by the United States government from 1820 to 1950 asked about citizenship. Other countries ask about citizenship. The United Nations recommends it as a best practice. And the Census Bureau today already asks a segment of the population about citizenship. But let's set these facts aside. Given that President Trump is no longer seeking to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census, Voting on a resolution to hold 2 cabinet members in contempt of Congress is simply a Democratic tactic to waste this chamber's time and avoid working on the serious issues facing our nation. I urge members to vote against the resolution so that the House can stop this partisan nonsense and focus on meaningful policy. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland.
I yield the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney, a member of our committee, 2 minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and for his great leadership. Madam Speaker, today we vote to defend the interest of the American people, our system of checks and balances, and our very Constitution with this resolution to hold Secretary Ross and Attorney General Barr in criminal contempt. For well over a year, Trump administration officials have lied through their teeth about the reason for adding a citizenship question to the 2020 census. They have repeatedly lied to Congress, the Supreme Court, and to the American people. In an effort to cover up their lies, they blocked every demand from our committee, every demand to comply with reasonable oversight, withholding documents, asserting illegitimate executive privilege, and blatantly ignoring bipartisan subpoenas, all to a degree that would literally break the Constitution if allowed to stand. New evidence revealed in court and that I shared on this floor revealed that the real reason for the question was to disenfranchise non-white voters. The Supreme Court ruled that the administration's explanation was, and I quote, contrived. A functional democracy depends on accountability. Accountability requires real oversight. The passage of this criminal contempt resolution is necessary to preserve the integrity of all congressional oversight on this and so many other issues, now and into the future. This contempt resolution, in fact, allows both Democrats and Republicans to do their job. Never, ever during my time in Congress have I encountered such complete contempt for the law, and that contempt deserves to be punished. I urge my colleagues to vote for this. Our democracy depends on it.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from North Carolina and one of the great leaders of this body, Mr. Meadows.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for your leadership. I thank the gentleman from Kentucky. Madam Chairman, let me give you a quote. Holding someone in contempt of Congress is one of the most serious and formal actions our committee can take. It should not be used as a political tool to generate press as part of an election year witch hunt. Now, who is responsible for that quote? It's not Ranking Member Jim Jordan. It's not Leader McCarthy. It's not Conference Chair Liz Cheney. It's Chairman Elijah Cummings. Those are his words. What we need to do is understand that we're using this as a political tool, and we're better than that. We're better than that. So I'm going to quote also from another letter, from the letter from Chairman Cummings. At that time, he was not the chairman. Chairman Cummings wrote a letter to Speaker Boehner. He said, a fundamental problem with conducting such a partisan investigation is that its results are not even-handed, but instead they're skewed, incomplete, and inaccurate. Chairman Cummings went on further. He said, these deficiencies are magnified when we rush from a committee vote to a floor vote at breakneck speed with little concern for the facts or the law. What was he referring to? He was referring to a contempt vote on Eric Holder. Now, here we are today in the same venue. I'm using the chairman's words, and so I'm going to make an appeal to the chairman with the hopes that my good friend opposite will heed these words. Because in that same letter, he made a direct appeal to the Speaker of the House at that particular time, and he said, I hope that the chairman would accept that the Attorney General is willing to come in and meet personally and enter into direct negotiations and enter in good faith to try to resolve this matter. So I'm hoping that the gentleman opposite will withdraw his contempt resolution, not force a vote on this, enter into a direct negotiation with the Attorney General of this great country, and hopefully resolve this without taking this particular matter. Madam Chairman, I think it is critically important that we understand why we're here today. It is because we're using two standards. One standard for the minority party at one time and one standard for a majority party another. Let's use the same standard and make sure that we give the Attorney General the ability to negotiate directly with the gentleman opposite. And Madam Chair, I certainly hope that cooler heads will prevail and that we actually get to the bottom of this, and it's about allowing Congress to do its job, but do it with respect. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Yield myself such time as I may.
Gentleman's recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Let me be clear. First of all, I want to thank the gentleman for quoting me so much. I'm tremendously honored. And I think the quotes that he used just reiterates what I said when I began, how seriously I take this matter. And I wouldn't be here if I did not consider this to be very serious. The other thing I would say is we made tremendous efforts, and the gentleman knows it because he's helped trying to work with me to try to get the documents and the things that we need. We have not been able to get them. And with that, I yield to Mr. Gomez 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The census can be used to either marginalize or to empower communities. This president decided on the path of marginalization, and they did that by coming up with an idea to silence the voices of immigrant communities throughout the country by adding a citizenship question that they deemed necessary to enforce the Voting Rights Act. But for 53 years, no Department of Justice had a problem of enforcing the Voting Rights Act without census block data on citizenship. But all of a sudden, 2017 comes around, you know what? We have a problem. And this is the excuse that they had. This is the reason that they had to add this question to the citizenship, to the census. And it is just completely false. You know, even to an extent that you saw that they said that the Department of Justice was the ones that asked for it. Then we find out later that they had to shop around to the Department of Homeland Security and other departments in order to get somebody to try to ask for the Census Bureau to add the question. But then they went back to Jeff Sessions, who carried out their request. So we're investigating because everything that they've said, the Department of Commerce and Wilbur Ross, has been a complete lie. And if you don't believe me, the recent Supreme Court decision said, quote, unlike a typical case in which an agency may have both stated and unstated rationale, the sole stated reason seems to have been contrived. And what does contrived mean? It means forced, artificial, manufactured, false. False. And that's what it is. It is a contrived reason. And the American people needed to have a right to know the real reasons, not the contrived reasons, not the ones that were manufactured, not the ones that were made up. And that's why we're asking for these documents. And that's why when Congress cannot perform its obligations as an oversight and check on the executive branch, then we must hold these individuals in contempt. And I ask my colleagues to do the same thing. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlewoman from West Virginia, Ms. Miller.
The chair will remind members that we are in the committee of the whole House, and as such, they are to direct their remarks to the Speaker pro tem. Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to oppose the resolution before us. Knowing who is in our country should not be controversial. Let me repeat that. Knowing who is in our country should not be controversial. Although my colleague across the aisle have blurted fact and fiction on this issue, the truth is asking a citizenship question is standard operating procedure. It is currently asked on the censuses throughout the world, in Australia, Canada, Germany, Ireland, Mexico, the UK, and many others. The United Nations even recommends asking the citizenship question as a best practice on the census, so countries can gather accurate information about their citizens. It's not a new idea in the U.S. either. We first asked a citizenship question on the census in 1820 and continued the practice for the next 130 years. And it is still asked every year on the American Community Survey. The information collected is protected by federal law, and our Justice Department uses the information to enforce the Voting Rights Act. We still ask the citizenship question on I-9 employment eligibility forms. Right here in the District of Columbia, a citizenship question is asked on driver's license applications. They do the same in Wisconsin. In California, anyone who applies for a firearm license has to answer a citizenship question. And in Ohio, concealed carry applicants must verify if they are citizens or not. These states believe it is fine to ask this question to obtain a firearm or driver's license, but it's not okay to ask on the census. So for anyone to claim that this is a hot-button issue, I just don't buy it. It seems a little bit more like hot air. I'm glad that President Trump is working across federal agencies to ensure that we can get this crucial information. I urge my colleagues to oppose this resolution so we can get back to actual work. I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished ranking chairman of our Committee on Civil Rights, the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, my colleague, Mr. Raskin.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like the chairman, I am charmed and tickled by the argument offered by our friend, Mr. Meadows, who quotes our beloved chairman in resisting a rush to a contempt vote against Attorney General Holder. Of course, two sides can play this game because the gentleman from North Carolina, of course, voted for and championed a contempt citation against the Attorney General in that case. So why would he support a contempt finding as appropriate against one Attorney General who's acting in a recalcitrant way, but not against another? Madam Speaker, this is not a policy battle about the citizenship question, although my friends seem to think that it is. They have already lost that battle. They lost it in the federal district courts 3 times. They lost it in the United States Supreme Court. When they lost it with Chief Justice John Roberts. They lost it with the majority of the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court that was gerrymandered by Senator McConnell for precisely occasions like this, so they could get the outcome they wanted. But even that court rejected the contrived rationale that was offered by the Commerce Department. It's been rejected by 6 former census directors. It was rejected by their own chief scientist in the Commerce Department and the Census Bureau. They lost the case under the Census Act. They lost the case under the Administrative Procedures Act. Even President Trump acknowledges that they lost it, at least today. I think he acknowledges it, although he does waver back and forth, and I hope nothing that we say today will prompt him to start over again. They lost because their justification was contrived, according to Chief Justice Roberts. It was made up, completely pretextual, according to the federal district courts, arbitrary, capricious, irrational, silly. We get the citizenship information we need right now, and we have for the last 70 years under what was called the long form, now what's called the American Community Survey. 6 former Census Bureau directors said, if you do what they wanted to do, but it's been rejected, but if you do what they want to do, you're going to get far more inaccurate counting. You're going to get a far less accurate portrait of America. If I might have 30 seconds more, Mr. Chairman.
Grant the gentleman a minute.
Gentleman's recognized for a minute.
Thank you very much. So if you want to talk about the policy, we can, but we don't need to. They've already lost repeatedly on that, and they seem not to want to acknowledge that basic fact of this discussion. This is about congressional power, Madam Speaker, and that's something that should unify every member of this body and institution. We must stand together. The Supreme Court has said repeatedly, the federal court said repeatedly, that our fact-finding power is inextricable and essential and indispensable to our legislative power. We have the power from the people, the sovereign political power of the people has been given to us to legislate, and we can't legislate if we can't get the information that we need. Sometimes we disagree when they're in the majority with the stuff that they want. I'm sure I wasn't here then, but I would have disagreed maybe with some of the fast and furious stuff or the millions of documents that they got in the Benghazi investigation. It makes no difference. The majority has a right to get what it wants. We've got a right to get what we want. If you act with contempt for the Congress of the United States of America and the people of the United States, we will hold you in contempt of the Congress and the United States of America, and I support these contempt resolutions.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from California, the great Minority Leader McCarthy.
The gentleman's recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Before I walked out of my office, I first looked at my calendar. I knew it was July, but I wondered if it was back in February. It's another day on the floor. It's like Groundhog Day all over again. Yesterday on this floor was a sad day. It's not a day about decorum. It's not a day about any of the issues that any of my constituents asked about. They ask me when I go home, and Madam Speaker, I envision that they ask most every member in this body, have you done anything about surprise billing? Had you made sure pre-existing conditions is protected like that bill Greg Walden has with so many co-sponsors? Have you done anything making sure the economy continues to grow? No, I go home and I tell them, they had another resolution to attack President Trump or the administration. So we may be in July, but it's Groundhog Day all over again. Are we doing anything about a budget? Because, Madam Speaker, I listened. I listened to my colleagues when they say, show me your budget, show me your values. And I know winning in a majority is important. And I knew, Madam Speaker, we're in the majority, putting a budget out is not easy. But it is the fundamental responsibility of a majority. So yes, I came to this floor hoping we'd have no debate about a budget. Can't tell my constituents that the majority did a budget this year. When they ask me, well, what about, I read all these about a caps, that you got to come into agreement to ever make something happen together. No, I'm coming back down to the floor. This time we're talking about contempt. They asked me, Madam Speaker, well, what contempt are you talking about? I said, well, it's regard the census. Well, wasn't that all solved? Well, yeah, that's already been solved and already been decided. But, Madam Speaker, this majority thinks it's another political opportunity. Then I listened and I heard this comment the other day. Madam Speaker, they said, I challenge you to find voters that can name a single thing House Democrats have done for their kitchen table this year. A single thing, challenging all voters to name one thing. And I wondered, did my press operation put that? No, it didn't come from my office. Then I wondered, maybe it was another Republican inside this body. No, it wasn't one member elected on the Republican side. This quote actually came from a chief of staff of one of the most prominent members on the other side of the aisle. I agree with that chief of staff. Name me one thing that we have done for the kitchen table. Yesterday, we did a resolution attacking the president. But we couldn't even get to that because, Madam Speaker, we couldn't even have decorum in this body. We set a record that we've never seen before based upon a speaker's action. The very first page in Thomas Jefferson's manual talks about decorum. But not only did this body try to change the rules after the fact, they don't think everybody's equal, Madam Speaker. Because if your words get taken down, you don't have a right to speak that day. But no, we should change that. We should show them. The majority should get what they want. Madam Speaker, I guess the majority doesn't want a budget. I guess the majority doesn't want to do anything about surprise billing. I guess the majority doesn't want to find, when it comes to our national defense, to keep a 58-year history of bipartisanship. They broke that record too. They made it partisan, and that's what we did last week. Well, now we're right back at Groundhog Day, and we're going to have contempt votes today. But that's not all we're going to do today. We're going to go for the third time on impeachment. Impeachment. Madam Speaker, I watched a crisis on a border. I listened to the other side who asked the president if he would pause a court action so we could deal with it. And I patiently waited those 2 weeks to have a hearing on it. Because, Madam Speaker, I'm not in the majority. I can't control these committees. The majority party can. They didn't have one hearing on it. But they've scheduled another one. They got Mueller coming in. They even postponed it so they could have more time. I guess 22 months, $40 million, 13 countries. I guess that's not enough. Madam Speaker, I wonder if it's only one chief of staff challenging to find voters that can name a single thing House Democrats have done for the kitchen table this year. Because when I'm home, they don't come up to me and talk to me about party. They talk to me about what the House is doing. Because in their house, in their kitchen table, you know what they talk about there? They talk about their budget. Because they do know their budget is their values. And they value having a budget. They'll talk politics, but I don't think they get too petty. It's interesting. In the kitchen table of the House of Representatives, there's rules for different people. I thought the rule of law mattered in this country. And I was kind of excited when I watched a problem-solving caucus stand up together, Republicans and Democrats, before there was a vote for a speaker in this Congress, and they requested a consensus calendar. And what does a consensus calendar mean? It means if a member from any side of the aisle works really hard, that they believe in the issue, that they get 290 co-sponsors. And you have to understand what that means. That doesn't mean walking up to a congresswoman or congressman and saying, will you support my bill? Will you put your name on this? Do you believe in this policy so great? Will you put your name on this? And it takes 218 to pass a bill, but that's not the number they put out. 290 to get above politics. If you made that happen, your bill would come to the floor. Well, that was the rule. That's what we just put in. Madam Speaker, you know what happened? There was this congressman from South Carolina. He didn't get 290. He's up to 370. He followed the exact rule that the majority just put in. And you know what happened at the day that he was going to be the very first bill on a consensus calendar? And what was the topic that really brought people together? Survivor benefits for those who gave their life to defend this nation. I was proud. I was proud that more than 370 people in this body did not play politics with that issue. But you know what happened when that day came? The rules are not equal. The rules are not equal. They are written, but they are changed. They were changed last Friday. They were changed so he could not have his vote. So Congressman Joe Wilson could not come to this floor. Was it changed in a committee? No. They put it in a rule. Self-executing. Yesterday, when I watched the quorum on this floor, any other member of this body would not have the right to speak if their words were taken down. If it was me, you, anybody else. But no, the rules were changed once again. And everybody on one side of the aisle, Madam Speaker, voted to change those rules. That they hold people seem to be different, seem to be special, seem that they can break the rules. I guess the majority should get what they want, not what the people around the kitchen table of America want. I wonder Madam Speaker, I wonder, when I watch people campaign and they talk about what they want to achieve here, how many said they wanted to have a week of contempt, of impeach, and resolution all after one entity, the President of the United States? I didn't have anybody on any side of the aisle ever ask me that question. I hold this job with a great deal of respect. You know, there's less than 12,000 people that ever had the privilege to serve here. I travel a long way each week to have that opportunity. I spend a lot of time thinking about it. I spend a lot of time listening and talking to my constituents. Last night, I went home and I did a telephone town hall. Thousands of people were on that call. Not one person asked me about the contempt of a census form that's already going out. They talked about an earthquake. They wondered if they'd have enough money. I said, I don't know. We don't have a budget. The hospital. This community is not very big, Ridgecrest, about 30,000. The earthquake did damage to the hospital. People are going to get some surprise billings. Not anything their fault, but we're not talking about it on this floor. We're not solving that problem. But we're holding another person in the administration in contempt. Is this going to go anywhere? Is this going to do anything for anybody's kitchen table? I know some people on the other side of the aisle, Madam Speaker, might get mad at this chief of staff. But sometimes you get upset when people speak the truth. Sometimes it hurts. What hurts more to the American public is more of this. If it's just going to be Groundhog Day every day that we serve here, because once we get done with this, we'll debate impeachment for the third time. For the third time, we'll debate impeachment. When we go home this week and we talk about what we achieved, I don't know what I can say. That's not why we ran. We are better than this. When I watched the decorum yesterday, I know we are better than that. But what's most disturbing to me is when somebody did not abide by the rules of the House, the rules were changed to protect that person. America is more than a country. America is an idea of self-governance, idea of a rule of law, of a respect. If you care so much to change the rule that you would have a consensus calendar, abide by it. Not just because somebody on the other side of the aisle worked harder. If you cared so much that you said a budget matters, that it sets the tone of who you are, produce one. I understand there's winners and losers in elections. But Madam Speaker, when I heard what a member said of why they wanted to battle, they admitted to their colleagues they were using the census investigation to gather information that, in his words, that the courts could use in ongoing litigation. So are we really here because your constituents asked about it? Are we here because you just want to play a little more politics? Because I would tell you this. You got another thing coming up right after that you could play politics on it one more time. I would ask, deep inside, that for once, let's put it aside. I know that election didn't turn out the way you wanted it, but at the end of the day, people expect us to find common ground. They expect us to give on both sides. And I will guarantee you, no one ever went to the polls to say, I want you to go there to spend a whole week just attacking an administration. I imagine the majority of people who voted for you had the same question that chief of staff. They wanted you to change the kitchen table. So let's start focusing on the issues that the American public is talking around their kitchen tables. And I yield back.
Members are directed to direct their comments to the chair. Gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself, such as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I just want to make it clear, Madam Speaker, as I listen to the comments of our very distinguished minority leader, I forgot. The fact is that what we are doing today is trying again to protect the integrity of this House and protect the integrity of the census and make sure that we get the records that we need to do our job. And I would hope that he would join us in making sure that happens, because it's not just about us. It's about people that will come and fill these seats when we're dancing with the angels. And so with that, I want to yield to the very distinguished gentleman from Virginia, a man who leads our government operations subcommittee excellently, the distinguished member from our committee again, Mr. Connolly. 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the Speaker, and I thank my good friend, the distinguished chairman of the Oversight and Reform Committee. Madam Speaker, what we just heard might be described as hyperannuated chutzpah. To bemoan accountability, to talk about a kitchen table that's, I think, imaginary. I can tell you it doesn't characterize kitchen tables in my district, and it probably doesn't characterize them all across America, which is maybe why the minority leader is called that instead of the majority leader in this Congress. Because my Republican friends abrogated any accountability, any oversight of this administration in the 2 years they were in the majority and Mr. Trump was in the White House. Americans are focused on economic and health issues, but that doesn't mean they don't care about what's happening to their country. They do. The census, the distinguished minority leader doesn't want you to focus on why the census question was so important, because it's in a context that is disturbing. It's in a context of voter suppression all across America. Get rid of early voting. Restrict absentee voting. Have stricter ID laws. Make it harder for students and people of color to vote. Purge voting rolls. Have manufactured assertions about phony voting, as if that were the major problem in America. Asking the citizenship question on the census is part and parcel of that scheme to discourage minority voting in America, to frighten immigrant communities.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Yield the gentleman another 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
And finally, maybe the worst of all, to bemoan the change yesterday to allow the Speaker to have her words considered and to allow her back on the floor. Why? Because we don't care about rules? No. Because we cared about the impact on millions of Americans of harmful, racist words. And we felt that duty to provide some comfort to those people that this House cared was more important than a juridical commitment
Gentleman's time's expired.
to an ancient rule.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Speaker, may I inquire how much time is remaining for each side?
Gentleman from Kentucky has 18.5 minutes. Gentleman from Maryland has 7 minutes. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Groffman.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Prior to talking about the census, I just want to make one brief point in response to some of the debate on the other side. We'll give some of the speakers a little bit of a project here. When we say the Pledge of Allegiance, we pledge allegiance to the flag and the republic for which it stands. And perhaps some of the speakers on the other side can do a little research as to why we pledge allegiance to the Republic. Today, again, we are debating because of a potential question on the census. There's certain people who feel that it would be wrong to ask about citizenship on the census. I can tell you as a lawmaker, I would certainly like to know how many people in this country are citizens. I'd also like to know how many people are legal or illegal, both of which may affect decisions we make, formulas we make here. I have a bill up in the past, I'll reintroduce it this year, that says that people who are non-citizens shouldn't be eligible for public benefits. If that bill were ever to become law, I can easily imagine distributions of money from this place being affected by the results on a census like that. Other countries do not have problems getting numbers if they ask about citizenship. Canada doesn't have a problem. Mexico doesn't have a problem. That's why the United Nations recommends we ask about citizenship. It didn't result in bad censuses until 1950. It doesn't result in bad results on the long form or bad results on the community survey. It doesn't result in problems in the state of Wisconsin where we have a citizenship question that you have to answer prior to getting a driver's license. So I wish we would put away this resolution today. I don't think it is right to spend more time debating the census question. I hope if President Trump if this does not appear on this census, that it is eventually put in the census for 2030. Thank you.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Yes, Madam Speaker. I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my good friend for courageously bringing this contempt resolution to the House today. The authority, the very integrity of the House of Representatives have been challenged by the administration as never before in American history. If it were not for the Supreme Court, the administration's determination to deliberately prevent an accurate census count would have succeeded. Neither the President nor the Republican House has the support of a majority of the American people. Using Secretary Ross, the administration tried to cheat its way to an undercount. Both Attorney General Barr and Secretary Ross have gone out of their way to refuse to provide needed documents or offered pretexts for not providing them pursuant to valid subpoenas. So serious has been this obstruction that the House must seek criminal contempt, which can carry stiff penalties and prison time, or simply surrender to the administration and invite continuing obstruction of our ability to perform our legislative and oversight functions. To be sure, we fully recognize the difficulty of enforcement of criminal contempt against this administration by this administration. But the House would as soon surrender its authority as to take no action in the face of historic and willful defiance. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to my friend from Ohio, the distinguished ranking member of the Oversight Committee, Mr. Jordan.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the gentleman from Kentucky for yielding and for his great work on the committee. Secretary Ross and Attorney General Barr are doing their jobs. So what's their reward? Democrats are going to hold them in contempt. Both agencies, the Commerce Department, the Justice Department, have submitted 31,000 documents to the committee. They've made available all kinds of witnesses for depositions and transcribed interviews. In fact, we got another one happening later this month. And the Secretary himself sat for over 6 hours in a hearing answering every single question the committee had. Raised his hand, said he swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help him God, answered all the questions. And what's he get for it? Democrats are going to hold him in contempt. And why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? All because they don't want a simple question on the census. Are you a citizen of the United States of America? That one sentence is driving it all. Are you a citizen of the greatest nation in history is driving it all. They're going to hold two people doing their jobs in contempt. All because they don't want to do what's been done for 200 years in this country. Since 1820, in one form or another, we have been asking the citizenship question on a census. They're going to hold them in contempt. All because they don't want to do what the UN says is the best practice. They're going to hold them in contempt. All because they don't want to do what's just plain old common sense. Listen to what Justice Alito said in his opinion a couple weeks ago. No one disputes that it's important to know how many inhabitants of this country are citizens, and the most direct way to gather this information is to ask it in a census. Shazam. Imagine that. Best way to figure it out is to ask the people in the country that you're surveying. Holy cow. And here's the kicker. Here's the final thing. You go anywhere in this country, any state you want to go to, walk up on some small town, some big city, walk up on the street, ask someone on the street, do you think when we do the census to figure out how many people are in this country, it's appropriate to ask if you're a citizen? And every person you talk to, every single one of them, will say, well, heck yeah. And oh, by the way, aren't we doing that already? And you'd have to say, yes, we've been doing it for 200 years. This resolution is ridiculous, and we should vote it down. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I just want to, Madam Speaker, I want to just remind our distinguished ranking member, when he talks about quoting from the courts, we might want to look at what the Supreme Court said about the language that Mr. Ross, Secretary Ross, used in our committee, because the same language was used in the Supreme Court case. And what the Supreme Court said was that that was contrived, and that's a quote, and incongruent with what the record reveals. In other words, he was saying it was not accurate. He may have come and testified before us, but it wasn't accurate. With that, I want to yield to the distinguished lady, a member of our committee, Ms. Plaskett, for her knowledge.
For how long is, I'm sorry?
Oh, 2 minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wanted to respond first to the distinguished gentleman from California, the minority leader, Mr. McCarthy, when he talked about us doing work. He asked us if work was being done here in Congress and that we weren't responding to the daily needs of America. I would remind him and remind the Speaker that we in fact have passed the Violence Against Women Act in the Judiciary Committee. The Energy and Commerce Committee passed the prescription drug bill that came to this floor. Energy and Commerce is working on Medicaid as we speak right now. 150 bills have been passed by this body and are sitting on the desk of his friend, the Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, who has decided that he is not interested in the work of the people of the United States. But guess what? We can walk and chew gum at the same time, as I've said, and this committee's responsibility is oversight, not anything else. And that's what we are doing, is oversight of this administration. I know that's difficult for that side of the aisle to want to think about, is overseeing and not reining in individuals who may be acting outside of the law. Last year, when the Secretary Ross testified before Congress, he said that he added the citizenship question solely to help the Department of Justice enforce the Violence Rights Act. We understand now that that may not have been true. And he has given us unresponsive, that's a legal term, unresponsive documents in those thousands of documents that he has turned over to us, not the documents that we have asked. And it's our responsibility as the Oversight Committee to hold individuals responsible. I would ask that my colleagues across the aisle would consider their responsibility on this committee, if you want to sit on the committee, to do the work of the committee, and that is overseeing this administration. I think that we have done our job and we are doing it well. If he has not been responsive, we must hold him in contempt. I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. The problem is that this is not the way we're supposed to go about the business of oversight. Contempt resolutions are generally something that happens deep inside and deep within an ongoing investigation when the committee has run up against brick walls and have exhausted all possibilities before them. That is certainly not the case here. We are in the middle of an investigation into federal agencies that are complying with our requests. This is absurd. The Oversight Committee has held 6 transcribed interviews with witnesses. Another one is on the way within days. Commerce Department and Justice Department have produced over 31,000 pages, documents, combined 14,000 from Commerce, 17,000 from Justice. These are not things that happen when we're talking about federal agencies that are stonewalling an investigation. That simply is not what's happening here. This investigation has only been going on for a couple of short months, and I would like to remind this chamber that it wasn't too long ago that then Ranking Member Cummings cautioned himself against pursuing a resolution of contempt in 2012, and that was after a year of stonewalling by the Obama administration. We're just a couple of months into this one. Look, if these federal agencies were legitimately stonewalling investigation as the Obama administration did, I would certainly feel differently, and I'm sure others here would as well, but they are not stonewalling, and the facts simply don't support this contempt resolution. I urge my colleagues not to support this, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows.
I don't think he can do that. He's already there. Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to make a point that in this body now on 2 consecutive days, we've broken the rules of Congress to expedite things. In this particular contempt resolution, I want to make sure that the record reflects that we broke Rule 2F on the committee about notice. It was brought to the attention of the chairman, and here we are again going and violating the rules of this House, not rules that the minority put in place, but rules that the majority put in place. And we gave the chairman the chance to perfect this procedural problem, and yet they continued on to hold this contempt violation. So I can tell you, they may vote today to hold them in contempt, but it is a violation of Congress's very rules itself that should have been remedied. And with that, I ask that the gentleman opposite withdraws his resolution so that we can perfect this, and I yield back.
Yields back. Gentleman from Maryland.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Armstrong.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Upon assumption of the chairmanship of the committee on January 19th, the chairman of the Oversight Committee formally initiated an inquiry into Secretary Ross's decision to reinstitute the citizens' question on the 2020 census. Just recently, as of June 27, 2019, the Supreme Court has issued a ruling. And the Supreme Court ruled that the administration may ask a citizenship question, but rejected the rationale presented by the Secretary Ross for adding the question on the 2020 census. The committee's fact-finding is still active and ongoing. The administration is cooperating with the investigation. The DOC and the DOJ have produced 31,000 responsive documents, 14,000 from the DOC and 17,000 from the DOJ. The committee has held 6 transcribed interviews with witnesses, and a 7th interview is expected. In short, Madam Chair, the Judiciary Committee has already held Bill Barr in contempt for not violating federal law. And now the Oversight Committee is about to hold Bill Barr in contempt for cooperating with the committee. This is wrong. This is not how we're supposed to do business in this chamber. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Maryland continues to reserve. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer.
Thank you. This is such a disturbing time for those of us that have spent our lives, our adult lives, trying to see that justice is done, laws are followed, and yet here we again come after Attorney General Bob Barr and another cabinet official, Ross. But truth is, I didn't really know Bob Barr when he got appointed, when he nominated, but I knew that he was friends with Bob Mueller. That caused me concern. But it appears we have an attorney general who is concerned about justice, and he's concerned about stopping injustices. And yet we still have people that are wanting to cause as much trouble for the president, stop his administration from getting as much accomplished for the American people as possible. And it's got to stop at some point. And so it's like a game. We come here and we're going to hold him in contempt again. This is a double secret probation against Bob Barr. How many double, triple, quadruple secret probations are we going to do? This isn't going to amount to anything. You take this to any federal judge to try to enforce it. He will look, she will look at the procedure and go, this is ridiculous. You're not going to have me hold the Attorney General in contempt for trying to follow the law, and you're wanting to interrupt his efforts to follow the law. That's not happening. So this is all about a show when there is true injustice going on. And thank God that we have a president that wanted to see justice done. He knew he didn't collude. And now we have an attorney general that's trying to do the same thing. Let's say no to this contempt. Let's get back to doing the job the American people want us to do. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman continues to reserve.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to make Mr. Cummings aware that I have no further speakers and I'm prepared to close.
Gentleman's recognized.
Gentlemen, we reserve, and the gentleman may close it, and we have no further.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized to close.
Well, Madam Speaker, I think that just about everyone who spoke on our side of the aisle made the factual points that this is not necessary. This resolution is an ongoing attempt by the majority party to try to do anything they can to disrupt the presidency of our President of the United States. Every country just about in the world asks the citizenship question. Mexico and Canada ask the citizenship question. In fact, the United Nations recommends that countries ask the citizenship question. I don't, for the life of me, know why we would resort to this type of action in this body, especially after what happened yesterday. I wonder, Madam Speaker, is this an attempt to try to move the direction of the American people from their frustration at the lack of achievement by the majority party from a legislative standpoint to try to somehow enrage their anger at the president? This is unnecessary. This is more political theater, and I urge the members of this fine body to oppose this resolution.
Does the gentleman yield back?
Back.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, may I inquire as to how much time is left?
Gentleman has 2 minutes remaining.
Very well. Madam Speaker, some of my Republican, I yield myself to 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized.
Some of my colleagues have argued that holding Secretary Ross and Attorney General Barr in contempt of Congress is premature. That's simply not true. If anything, it is long overdue. The Department of Commerce and the Department of Justice have failed to comply with congressional requests for more than a year. The Oversight Committee Democrats first asked for documents from the Commerce Department in April of 2018 and from the Department of Justice May of 2018. Those requests were ignored. When I became chairman, I renewed those requests. In response, the administration produced thousands of pages, but most of the documents were either heavily redacted, already public, or non-responsive to the committee's requests. So the committee narrowed its requests and issued bipartisan subpoenas to compel production of that narrow group of documents. That was in April, more than 3 months ago. I even asked Secretary Ross to meet with me personally. He refused. And last month, the committee passed the bipartisan resolution before us to hold Secretary Ross and Attorney General Barr in contempt of Congress. Still, neither department has provided the documents that we've asked for. And so I've come to the floor to urge our members to vote in favor of this. I do not, again, bring this lightly. This is not theater. This is about doing our job. This is about protecting the integrity of not only our census, but of our Congress. And with that, Madam Speaker, I urge all members to vote for this resolution, and with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Pursuant to the rule, the previous question is ordered on the resolution. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolution.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Does the gentleman request the yeas and nays?
Yes.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on the question will be postponed.